Hello everybody and welcome to Amy, and today I want to talk about Stipe Miocic's big advantage over Francis Ngannou that I don't really think is being talked about enough or has been noticed by anybody. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And alright, let's get this started. So I want to start with Francis Ngannou. If you look at Francis Ngannou's record, it's really outstanding what this guy has achieved. He knocks out heavyweights like it's nothing, and he submits them like it's nothing. If you look at Francis Ngannou, he displays raw power. Alias, that's why his nickname comes the Predator. He displays raw power fighting against his opponents, and the one thing that we never noticed was that Francis Ngannou doesn't have a wrestling background. He wanted to start boxing, but then his trainer told him that he should start MMA because he has more possibilities, opportunities in the future with MMA rather than boxing. So we all could see that Francis Ngannou doesn't have a wrestling background, but we really never acknowledged it because he just knocked out everybody that came in his way. And even if he faced some pretty good wrestlers, he just knocked them out. Most of his fights were really short. Just look at his fight versus Alistair Overeem. Francis Ngannou relies heavily on just charging at his opponent and pounding on him till either the ref steps in or the opponent is knocked out, or he just relies on raw power to submit his opponents. So Francis Ngannou's fighting game, we really never realized that he's vulnerable to wrestlers. And Stipe Miocic showed us that that is the case, that Francis Ngannou, just no matter how strong he is vulnerable. He's vulnerable to wrestlers because he doesn't have the background. He didn't really learn it. People just watch it on the Joe Rogan Experience. It is even being talked about there that in his entire training camp, Francis Ngannou didn't want to wrestle. He didn't have any ground game. If you're a MMA fighter, you have to learn at least takedown defenses. Just look at Israel Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz. Israel Adesanya may be the best striker in the world. If you don't have great takedown defense, it doesn't mean anything because a good wrestler will take you down. Look at, for example, Conor McGregor against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Conor McGregor had at least some good takedown defense in the first few rounds, but after he gassed out, just like he always does, because it's his Achilles heel, because I think if Conor had a better gas tank, he would have been one of the best fighters in the UFC to date, then Conor McGregor would have had a chance against Khabib. And what we also never really saw was just how good of a chin Francis Ngannou has. Stipe showed us that Francis Ngannou has gas tank problems because he relies too much on his hard punches, that he charges at his opponents, punches them down. Even just I told you before that they get knocked out or the ref steps in or you can get a submission. And we saw that in his fight against Stipe Miocic. Francis Ngannou was gassed out. He was in fact so much gassed out that he didn't have a single significant strike in the fourth round. And Francis Ngannou's ego was bigger than planets, you know. Just think about it. You didn't really have a wrestling background, and all of a sudden you come to the heavyweight division in the UFC and you start knocking out world-class fighters left and right. Look at Junior Dos Santos. Look at Alistair Overeem. Of course his ego must be off charts. But then he faced Stipe Miocic, who humbled him at least a tiny bit, and I think he has had a very good learning curve after that fight, because if you can't learn after a fight, you will end up like Luke Rockhold, and that is never good. And the thing was, Francis Ngannou was at first far too intimidated, and there came the Derrick Lewis catastrophe. Derrick Lewis catastrophe was that Francis Ngannou didn't really have his self-confidence anymore. But he bounced back, and he bounced back better than ever before. Just look at his fight against Jairzinho Rosenstruck. He charged at him, pounded at him, and the guy was knocked out in a couple of seconds. But what we can see from Francis Ngannou's fighting patterns is Francis Ngannou relies on pounding on his opponents till they get KO'd, and he relies on lucky shots. Technique is not really Francis Ngannou's area of expertise, or it was at least before he faced Stipe Miocic. Just look at the slow-mo of his fight against Jairzinho Rosenstruck. Most of his really hard punches that he threw didn't really even connect. It is normal for punches for fighters to throw them that most of them don't connect, but for that many of these punches to not connect, that isn't a very good sign. But let's get back to Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic is always underrated. The guy, if you think about it, there is not really an easy way to advertise Stipe Miocic. And if you look at the history of the UFC, most fighters rely on self-promotion. The UFC doesn't really know how to promote their fighters. Look at Conor McGregor. The UFC didn't advertise Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor advertised himself. Look at Michael Bisping. Look at Israel Adesanya with his weeaboo characteristica. And Stipe doesn't really stand out before that. He's just a humble man-child, and he's good at being a very good man-child with his friends. So, let's get back to Stipe. Stipe is currently the belt holder in the heavyweight division. He has the record highest number of title defenses in heavyweight history, and he's one of the best pound for pound fighters to date. And I think Stipe is really underrated, and I think it's a disgrace that he often is the underdog. Even as a champion, he is the underdog in his fights, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And Stipe has a wrestling background. And Stipe, in my opinion, has one of the highest fight IQs to date. Just look at his second fight against Daniel Cormier. Stipe Miocic changed his fighting strategy mid-fight. He changed his fighting strategy in the middle of a round where he started to target Daniel Cormier's liver because he saw that Daniel Cormier had his arms up the whole time. So, if he always struck out against his head and Daniel Cormier went up, he always started targeting his liver. And we all know how the first fight went down. An eye poke by Daniel Cormier, Stipe was vulnerable, lucky elbow, and he was knocked out. So, Stipe learns very easily. He changes his strategy mid-fight, and that, in my opinion, is one of the best advantages a fighter can have. And if you look at his fight against Francis Ngannou, if you look at the fight in slow-mo, Stipe, first of all, dodged most of Francis Ngannou's shots. He not only evaded them, he also landed some solid counter punches. And there is a video where Francis actually connects with one punch, and Stipe then directly went for a takedown. Because as good as a chin Stipe has, you don't want to get hit by Francis too much, because you will just go down. No matter how great of a chin you have, you don't want to get hit by a Francis Ngannou. And the one thing, on all news platforms, nobody is talking about this. Stipe Miocic is a firefighter, okay? First and foremost. It's a great thing. It doesn't matter if he's just a part-time firefighter. Stipe Miocic, even before he started fighting in the UFC, even before he started practicing mixed martial arts, he threw himself in life-threatening situations where your reflexes start to kick in, your fight or flight reflex. And Stipe Miocic, as a firefighter, as a first responder, you have to learn that. You have to learn how to control your adrenaline, how to control your emotions, and this is the big advantage Stipe Miocic has over every other fighter that there is. It's not even close. Look at how Stipe Miocic looks at the weigh-ins. Look how he looks at his opponent in his face-off. Look at how he looks in his fights. He doesn't have any real emotions. He's used to it. He can control his adrenaline. He's not nervous. And that's the big advantage Stipe Miocic has over anybody else. You might be the best fighter in the world. If you get nervous, if you let your emotions control you, you're going to lose that fight. Francis Ngannou, he might be homeless, but we all saw what happened during the fight with Stipe. Francis Ngannou, he started getting too emotional. He emptied his gas tanks. He was far too overconfident in himself. He didn't really train. Just as I've mentioned earlier, he didn't even try training wrestling. He just wanted to strike because he didn't think anything about wrestling. He thought it was unnecessary. And here's how I think Francis Ngannou might have a chance to win that fight. So, Francis Ngannou lands a lucky shot against Stipe. If you look at his fighting records, most of his wins are lucky shots or pounding at his opponent until the ref steps in. So, he can either KO Stipe Miocic in the first few rounds. He can try to submit Stipe with his raw power, but I don't think that's really the case because Stipe has really good defense, and I don't think that he's stupid enough to allow Francis Ngannou to do that. For Francis, it is very hard to win with a decision. We saw it in his fight against Derrick Lewis. We saw it against his fight against Stipe. Francis Ngannou must be the aggressor. He relied too much on lucky shots. It will be really hard for him to win by points. And just as I've said, it will be very hard to submit Stipe Miocic. And here's how I think how Stipe will win. It will be very hard for Stipe to knock out Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou has a great chin. Let's say it like that. He has a great chin. He withstood a ground and pound by Stipe for nearly 5 rounds, and he didn't really look one bit bothered by it, so I don't think Stipe will knock him out, or it will be very hard to knock out Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou, just by his raw strength, has very good submission defense. He might lack the technique, but he has great submission defense, and that's just because of his raw power. Because even if Stipe might get his arms under his neck, Francis with his raw power, he can just defend it effectively. So Stipe will, I really think the fight will go 2 ways. So either Francis Ngannou knocks out Stipe Miocic in the first 2 rounds, first round or second round,